Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being on my talk. I'm going to start today with this morning. And this morning I flew in to Oslo. It's my first time. 2 years back I also talked, but I couldn't make it due to Corona. So I'm very happy that I'm here. So whenever I go to a new city or somewhere that's not new, I look at Google Maps, right? Just to look. There was very clear. Like, you should take the train and it will take you 20 minutes, but I check. I like that. That's a bit of a control thing with maps. So I'll check the map and I'll see, okay, there's the airport, and then I zoom in and then I look, okay, where do I need to be? So I roughly know where to go, right? I'm navigating my journey through Oslo. And the good thing is tonight I'm going to go out to dinner, and for me a map is a good thing to place on, so I just ask it for restaurants. I always double check with other apps, right? I don't solely trust Google for everything, so I cross-check it. But it's nice to have the map, and it's nice to know where I am. I flew in this morning. I could have a very good visibility of Oslo, and I use maps. Now you might be wondering, what's this talk about? This was about architecture and enablement aligned decisions. Well, my role is as an independent consultant, I go to companies and I do architecture, whatever that means. If you went to Barry's talk, he will explain a little bit more about that. I'm also very, what do you mean with architect? But I call myself an enablement architect, and I do software architectural, technical leadership, and social technical system design. Thomas was supposed to be here. Unfortunately, he couldn't come. And he is a platform engineer, and we're both team topology valued practitioners. We worked at the same client together. And it's interesting, I come from a DDD world, he comes from more of a DevOps world. And we went into this company together. We started around the same time. I started as an enablement architect, trying to help teams do better architecture, and then this person came into us and he says, well, you know, there's this thing coming up that's called business continuity management. Who's ever heard of that? Anyone? Yeah, it's like this thing that companies want to know if there are potential threats to an organization and the impact those threats might cause to business operations. That's what they ask. So first thing you need to know, okay, what are the business, what's the business, what are we actually doing, what is the value chain, and the second thing is what are the software that's running these things. Well, they come to me as an architect, of course, because we should know this, right? Well, I was just new, and whenever I go into a company, and here's the thing why I talked a little bit about the Google Maps thing, when I go into a company, I get all these models and diagrams, and it's great, but it doesn't really give me a landscape of where to navigate to. Who's had this when they're entering an organization, very hard to navigate them? Who's where can I be for this? And there's an org chart, right? But that's just like a phone line. And there's another org chart that's a real org chart, which is like that manager that can call the CEO up, right? That's the other org chart. That's a dynamic org chart. Nobody talks about that. So it helps me a little bit. These are all useful tools, by the way. I love them, but they don't really, it's like finding a restaurant for me. I go to a team and they show me a C4 diagram. I'm like, nice. At least I get some context of it. But it really doesn't show me how to find potential threats, right? And then sometimes I actually go to the architects and they have this very nice Archimate. Who's used Archimate before? Yeah, I thought so. I did Archimate once and never used it. Archimate is really what architects usually use to do exactly that, right? They're getting the business, then the application layer, and then the infrastructure layer. It's a very nice modeling tool, but nobody understands except usually the architects. And there's a potential problem in there, because that usually means they're never up to date, right? So, but in this company we went to, there was really no landscape. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So teams usually, hopefully, not in a startup, but usually in a bigger company, they're part of a larger socio-technical system. And without that map of that landscape, it's very difficult to them to understand the true impact of the architectural decision of the overall system. So flying into Oslo, I saw all these rivers flowing, right? And I'm like, oh, that's great, but how do they flow? Which way? If someone puts shit on top of it, it flows down the river without maybe them knowing that it runs down, or who they impacted down. Well, we have maps nowadays. Hopefully the government knows. But in an organization, I usually don't see that anymore. Who has this experience? Like, I'm trying to touch something here, and then bam, some other team starting to come knocking at our doors. Yeah, we lack that understanding of the landscape. Now, and there's this thing what's happening over the past years and years, and I like to show you this graph of what is happening usually. So, a lot of years ago, there was waterfall. And then people thought, let's put dev and ops together. That's actually a little bit lower. Let's put build and test together. Let's put more teams and teams together as one, so that we don't have what they call here these external handoffs or the internal handoffs, right? Because those block your flow to delivery. What we're now in, what I usually see teams being in, is somewhere in this area, right? People outside select the opportunity, they do requirements engineering, they maybe do design or not, and then they go to the team itself. Who's in that situation right now? Design is being used outside the team. Yeah. So what we are seeing is we're moving more and more down towards product teams. This is actually 14 years ago when I got into the industry, this was my standard. And it worked pretty well because we were very autonomous. We could select our own opportunities, working with the business, working with the domain experts. And that's what team topology writes about. You design it, you build it, you run it. They're saying you have a flow of all activity a team performs from that opportunity, which is a need or a problem or something stakeholders want or something a user wants of your system. And one team have all the activities to go to the solution and get feedback. And as Dave Farley says, quick, reliable, and timely feedback, right? So then we can iterate and move forward. So that's a bit of what a stream-aligned should be, in my opinion. And this team needs to take architectural decisions. So what are architectural decisions? In the book I wrote with Gien and Evelyn, we take a little bit of the economic theories of a decision, meaning we have alternatives, hopefully. We have several options to a decision. So if you need to take an architectural decision, hopefully you have several options. If you don't, it's not a decision because just go with the option. Usually the other option is don't do it. So then the other thing is the information. What do we know? Very important, right? Diagramming can help. Surely should do that. And then we have preference. What do we actually want? So these three things are all the information we need as an input to a decision. And then we have the logic, the process of making the decision. We're analyzing the decision. You can use something like an ADR. You do some trade-off analysis or et cetera, et cetera. And then you go to a course of action. This is actually the important thing here. Course of action. A decision have to have a irrevocable allocation of resources. Meaning, if I, at the 1st of January, decide to go to the gym because I have this New Year thing, I want to go to the gym, that's not a decision. It's a decision once I bought actually a subscription, right? Then I put money in it, and then I lost something, so that's irrevocable allocation of resources. So those are decisions. So this is, if you put teams more in control of software architecture, this is what all the teams need to do. And I actually want to focus on that information about what we know. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, because well-defined boundaries that domain-driven design talks about, microservices talks about, that means teams can decide their own architecture, and this is a great book by Andrew that says, well, at this case, we can have a team decide from that user story or from that need, they take decisions, decision required, option made, decision and shared, decision implemented, and user story in production. He calls this the advice process. So this is where you see a lot of people moving to, or at least organization, I see that. The architecture advice process is where advice is sought and offered in flight. So meaning if there's someone in a team that needs an architectural decision, they can take the decision. They just need to get to the experts and the ones who are impacted. And that's where it gets hard. Impacted. That's what I talked about it before. So if we implement this, we expect teams that can make decisions now in an advice process to understand who is actually impacted by my decision? And that's without a landscape, without proper modeling, they don't have that. And that's what I see in the companies I consult is as teams gain more independence, which I think is a good thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about it later. System impact decision made without deep understanding becomes a direct route to increasing cognitive load. Team topology talks about the load of a team. And this is what a lot of people usually have as an argument, right? We're going to put testers in the team. Well, do we now need to test? That's a lot of intrinsic knowledge I need to have. Who's heard this argument of putting more and more into a team? Like now we need to do everything? Who's ever heard that argument before? Yeah. And that's true. So teams need to understand more. Teams need to understand, have more skills as a whole team to do the work they need to do. And that actually increases load. And what happens when that system knowledge, so that landscape knowledge of the entire organization, if that's not there, then you get these things in the flow that, okay, who's impacted? Oh, that other team solutions that just impacted ours. And why is our software failing all of a sudden? These are all the things in a landscape that can impact us, but that can also impact our decision and especially our team flow. So that's the paradox that you always have, centralization and decentralization, right? That's usually the discussion. Do we take centralized decision or do we take decentralized decision? And Andrew here made it very clear, right? What you see a lot of architects do is going from the ivory tower, which sits over there, right? All the teams go to the ivory tower, the architects with the system-wide knowledge, because they have Archimate, can make that decision and then trickles down to the team. That's blocking. On the right side, we nowadays have architects, that was me up until recently, sitting between the teams, with the teams, but still they rely a lot about me. I'm modeling with all the teams, so I have a general observation of what the entire landscape is and what their decision can impact to other teams, right? This is usually the architect in between teams. Very useful, but now I'm also still that blocker to flow. Doesn't matter if I'm the ivory tower that I get like driver tickets to, or I'm in between modeling with the teams, which is a good thing, but then usually the knowledge still resides with me. And that still they will wait for me to give them that knowledge. And that's a problem. So stream-aligned teams are designed to be and granted with autonomy, but then they're criticized of lacking that organizational context. Who's heard this before? Like teams get independent, but yeah, do we really need to give them independence because they don't understand the business? They don't understand the impact they have on the business making that decision. Who's ever heard managers tell you that? Unfortunately, that's a self-justification for hierarchical control, right? You say they need me because without me they cannot do it. Well, that just self-justifies your control. So how can we fix this? Well, there's this thing about centralization, and here is a talk by Trond Jorteland, who talks from the talk Thriving in Complexity. He quotes Marilyn Emery, and Marilyn Emery says, on one hand, as soon as people are forced to compete, they have to look after their own interests, and so self-interests become dominated, right? So in a very hierarchical control, self-interests get dominated. And there's a lot of science and a lot of empirical research behind it. She says it is only when people involved work out their own design that's necessarily motivation, responsibility, and commitment to effectively implement is present. Meaning, if you put them into design, it works a lot better. So I'm very much in favor of that decentralization, only we don't need to just move to that way, because that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy again, and then you get people, see, I told you so, they cannot do it by themselves, and here comes the hero hierarchical people again. And what you see happening as well when teams start to work solely is that they require some diagramming themselves. And then some might use C4, some start to use structurizer, some start to use Mermaid, some start to use some other things. Who've seen that with more independent teams? All teams start, some use planned UML, we're going to generate it by code. Yeah, and this is the other side of the problem, right? On the one hand, we have architects who are in between or above teams and says, Archimate is the thing because we can model everything. Yeah, and no developer uses that, so nobody understands it, so you have no landscape. On the other hand, you have all the independent teams that are using their own thing, their own tools, because it works for them. But there's no coherence, there's no landscape. And that's a problem. And that problem really can lead to unhealthy conflicts, because if everyone has a different image of how the landscape is, they will turn into conflict. You see it in the world, right? Where are the boundaries? And then people start to fight, unfortunately. So instead of you versus me, we want to have you plus me towards the model, towards the landscape. So if we just have a clear landscape with each other, it turns into less unhealthy conflicts. So how can teams have a shared understanding of the system they are building software in? That's really the question I'm gonna go through today. And now, I'm not sure how long ago, but a while ago, there was this guy called Simon Wardley. Who's seen his talks or who's seen Wardley mapping? He has a similar problem, not in architecture, but he had it with business. So he says, without a map, you're just guessing. You're relying on story, gut feeling, and charisma. That's no way to run a business. So his example is really about two people playing chess together on a chessboard, but nobody can see the chessboard. So they're just mimicking each other's positions, right? And that's what Wardley says. So Simon says, okay, he invented a map. He looked at Sun Tzu, he looked at how war is being fought, and they say everyone is on the map to understand a little bit of what's going on. And he used it for strategy. So you have a customer, you have the value chain, which goes down here, which is this axe, which says we have a customer, and a customer has a need to have online image manipulation. And for that, we need online photo storage. We need a website. That customer also needs to print. We can do that on the website. And then it trickles down all the way to data, compute, and power. This is a simplified representation, by the way, just so you know, to quickly explain a little bit about mapping. So Wardley mapping is really designed to help you learn and communicate strategies. It's about making the implicit explicit so it can be challenged. So it's a map, similar to how I used the map in Oslo, but then for a business. Sounds great. He uses this for strategy. So he says it's about moving from gut feeling and storytelling to a more engineering-like approach to strategy. So who's seen their strategy of their company before? Who understands what's actually written there? It's usually something with cloud. Now it's probably AI. There's this generator that he created, right? This you can F5 this, and this is a strategy. Sounds. Yeah? This is usually the strategy I then see, but you know, it's very generic, it's very common, and that's what he tries to solve with Wardley mapping, right? It's a method, and he says, okay, we have this thing going down here, and then we can move all these pieces that are on the board or on the landscape in the value chain, we can move that in what he calls an evolution. Evolution are genesis, that's too it's too experimental, and he says in custom build, that's actually where new things pop up. New scale-ups, things pop up, that's custom build. So they're starting, what they're saying here, we're starting online image manipulation, and it's new in the market, and we're trying to thrive. He says once this hits, once it's successful, it will probably move to product. Product is scaling. And then eventually it moves to commodity, which is utility. As he says here, power is really something I buy myself. Now, if companies do this and they have a lot of things on the right side, it means they have a lot of commodities. It's like, okay, where are we doing business? So he can use the map to look at the evolution and look where are we actually attacking. There's a lot more strategy towards that. You can read all up on it. It's all freely available. You don't need to buy a book or anything. He written blog posts. But what I want to talk about is this value chain. Because within architecture, sorry, it always bugs this. Within the domain-driven design community and the team topology, we have Suzanne Kaiser. And she wrote a book, it's almost coming out, and she actually combines Wardley mapping with domain-driven design and team topology. So moving this tool of Wardley mapping more towards and connecting it with architecture. So C says we have a teacher, we have a student, we have our activities, and you can see here everything is done by the big ball of mud. Maybe not such a good thing to do. But this gives you a way to dissect it. So from the DDD community and from the team topology community, people started experimenting with Wardley mapping for software architecture. And then within team topology, we have this specific thing, which is not necessarily a map, because we don't map evolution on it, but we map teams on it, and it's called user needs mapping. And user needs mapping does exactly the same start as Simon Wardley does. It goes to users, and then it steps into needs. And from that needs, we go down the value chain, and we can actually map teams on. Now, this is a very simple diagram, just to show you. But I'm gonna actually try to do this with you. So I need to switch, so something probably goes wrong. Always does. Yeah. Thought so. There we go. So here you can see the legend key in the top, and maybe I need to make this a little bit bigger for you. So let's say today we have a Positively Delicious. That's the company. And they say we have a takeout customer. And a takeout customer can have either a need, and that need can be fulfilled by activity. So anyone wants to guess what's the need of a takeout customer who sits at home, wants to order food to be delivered at their home? Menu? Yeah, that would be an activity. So they want to check food. So I would call that an activity, right? So I would call an activity like check restaurants and food. This is too small, probably. I'll make it a little bit larger. So the real user need is someone else? Get food delivered at home. Yeah, get food delivered at home. So when you look at Simon, he usually gets into this area, which is get food delivery at home, which is a need, which is the essential need. But what we usually do in a company is create a whole user journey out of that, or a process, right? So get food delivered at home might be check restaurant and food, then make an order. And again, I'm simplifying here because this is I'm going to show you some examples later from afar how this actually goes into the company. So make an order, and there might be pay order and confirm order, and the last one might be track order. So this might be the activity simplified. And what we can do here is what I do, by the way, so a little step back to the business continuity management, right? I went to teams and I started doing this with the team. So I asked them, who's your user? What are all the, to make it simple, I asked them, what are the activities that your software is supporting? I didn't want to go into the whole user needs and what are needs and what are activities discussion. What are the activities? That's usually something that they can come up with, right? Well, they're going to this UI, and then they do this step, and then I extract that knowledge, and then I say, okay, that sounds like a process to me, so let's put it into a process, and then I say this is the online ordering process. Now, in a particular company, they might not know this. There are also very much more bureaucratic companies that do know their value streams. Then it's a very simple acquisition to start with this. Who thinks that when they do it in this team, it's very simple to come up with the process? Who thinks that? Yeah. Yeah, it really depends on where to go. So usually I just step in, can you talk me through what's the first step, go through it. If that's hard, I might do an event storming first, because out of an event storming, I can actually extract this as well. But usually this should be enough. What I can then do is say, okay, what's supported here? Well, we have a takeout app. So in this case, as you can see, Simon talks about capabilities, and you say in the legend it's also a capability, and usually it starts with software system. So they might say there's a takeout app. Okay, then we say, well, to do this, they need to go to the takeout app. These are straight lines, by the way. And this goes in the takeout app. This goes in the takeout app. This goes in the takeout app. Well, this is not so insightful, I guess, right? So what you can do now is, we're on the level of a system now. So in C4 talk, this is like the context, right? It's a software system. What we could do is say, okay, tell me more about what's in that software system. So we can actually say, let's model on this a software system, and let's call this, well, we might have, sorry, needs to go down. Nope. We might have sometimes this Miro just wants to, yeah, I did that, hopefully. I did page down. Let's see if that works. Nope. This is sometimes very annoying. So it might be the restaurants page, right? And that's how we might be able to split this up further. So we might have a restaurant page, we might have an order page, or and this is how you can dive into a system, right? And ask the team, okay, what's inside that system? Do you know, or do you not know? If they don't know, I'm getting more anxious, but let's discover, right? So I can make this and I can map this out further here, and I can do the same actually with this one and this one and this one, and I'll show you an example. So I can put the software system here, and I can say this is the takeout app, right? And then this restaurant thing will go to a system down. So hopefully you get a little bit of the gist here. So I can go to the restaurant, the online ordering service, I think it's called, and then I can connect that and say this restaurant page to do a check restaurant and food, that's in this online ordering page. So it's a dependency. It's not really a dependency, it's a need map. This needs that in order to fulfill this. Yeah, so that's basically you use a needs map, and then we can say, okay, these things, who owns those? So it doesn't want to go page down, so I need to do it like this. Bring, send to back. Always great. So I can put this on top, meaning these components, these systems, so these needs are fulfilled by this system and are owned by this team. And that's a great conversation if you're in a company that's willing to do business continuity management, because there's already one threat. If there's a thing in the chain that's not being owned by something, we already have probably a big issue. Because in the chain, I can clearly show this need, this activity is resolved by everything in that chain. And everything in that chain needs to work as designed in order to fulfill that need. And that's a landscape. It doesn't have evolution in it, fine, but at least there's teams in it. So I'm going to switch back, and I'm going to see if this works. Probably not. Nope. Switching back. Let's see if it takes it straight away. Yep. Okay, so now we have a map. And it might look something like this. Still very simplified. Yeah. So in this case, as you can see here, I have the home delivery order. It has a few activities in there. It has some things in the takeout app. The takeout app needs to go to the home delivery service. The home delivery service, and I can do this, needs probably some authentication, as you can see, right? Which is being done by a core platform services platform group, which is the internal development platform. Great, now we know that authentication is done or delivered by this team. And then we have the home delivery service. In order to confirm that order, they need the restaurant service. Oh, in order to select the products, we also probably need that restaurant service. And then we can go down, as you can see. There's this complicated subsystem team, kitchen service. We also need that to confirm the order. And there's a few more of these services here. So as you can see, that's the value chain going down. And there's clear boundaries of who owns what. And that's the start of the map. So again, this is a little bit example. Here you can see from far some real maps. I changed it around, of course, because I cannot show you real maps. But as you can see here, here's a legacy system. Now, what's the first thing you notice here? No team ownership. That's a big red flag. So if I'm with the business continuity manager, I say, well, we have our first big flag here. Nobody's owning that. There's some things down the chain here, but nobody's owning that. Who's seen that before? These things, that things are not owned by anyone, or someone doesn't really know who owns it, or yeah. So these maps clearly show that, right? And then what I also add here are the teams that are actually dependent on this process, right? As you can see here, I also mapped in the teams who are dependent on the same process again. And as you can see here, this is really a legacy system with a lot of things going down. There's a lot of things being not owned here as well. And then we go down, we go down, we go down. And we figured out that there's something in here that could let this thing fail. Right? Because that's what I'm doing with the map with the teams. I'm asking them, where are the threats? What can make this thing fail? Now, this is another interesting one. We have one team here, we have another team here, and we have the same team here again. So there's like a ping pong match going on there probably, right? You build that, then you build that again, and that's the interaction that you can get from the map. And then we have this one, and this is really a modernization where you see this is actually, if you analyze it, a correct architecture, but they need to like disentangle the entire landscape around them. So this is another pattern, as you can see here. There's no ownership here yet. That's because they're in between, right? This thing is really replacing this thing. So that's why there's no ownership, but still that's a major threat to your business continuity, right? But great, we have our maps now. So the question is, what can we do on the map, right? I already showed you a little bit of what I could do on the map. It shows clear ownership, it shows who owns what, but what can we do more? As I said here, a map is a great starting point, but it's just a map to navigate where you want to go. So the first thing I will be doing tonight is look at the restaurants, for instance. So what can we do on the map? So the first thing we did, and Thomas is not here, but from a platform engineering, from a reliability engineering, we can do reliability engineering. We can actually ask, okay, how much load is actually on this line? So we were sitting with Thomas's team and with me, and we were asking these questions. Okay, is this how, of course, we're looking at the important stuff. Let's say this is a very important part of your process. Then we go into this process and say, okay, how much load is actually on here? And how reliable do you want it? They had Datadog in the background, and they instantly looked at the queries, and they could instantly check this line. And what they did, they would make SLOs out of it, so that they can monitor that. So what we did next on the map is actually looking at SLOs and also looking at all these lines, right? How is the integration points here? So we deep dived on the architecture more to look for potential threat. This line going down to another team might not be an issue if that's a good integration, right? You will always have this. You will always have integration between teams. That's a common thing. If it's a good integration, that's fine. Now, I've been in these sessions where they're not even sure who owns this system. Now I have a problem, in my opinion. Because what sometimes happens is that this line changes, and when that line changes, things might trickle down up. And that's what we actually saw at in some of our meetings, in some of our sessions, is that one of the teams, so let's say this team, is dependent on that team, and that team was actually changing for their user the specs, the performances. And that lowered the latency for the other team, impacting their stuff. So there was a problem within that team. The teams didn't really talk with each other, right? But through this, we can have that conversation with the teams. So the second thing we can do is that team interaction modeling. So within team topology, as you can see, I'm using the team topology model here, but I'm using it to explain something, to model. I'm not using it as SAFe does, right? Having these 4 team types. That's not the purpose of team topology. The purpose of team topology is try to get it in these forms with these interactions, and what happens when you can't? And is that a problem? That's the power of team topology. In essence, I can have these X as a service facilitating and collaboration. I can also map that on here between these teams. And I might go now deeper into a team interaction modeling. And a team interaction modeling is using the shapes to find out if this changes, this order home cooked meal, how does the interaction go with the payment team or the authentication team? Is there a change, and how is that change? Is that intentionally, are we going collaboration? Is there already service, and how are we moving in that direction? So that the map also shows that intentional collaboration between the teams, because I can just pop up the map and we can show, okay, who are you impacted by and how can we change that? So it's a great start for team interaction modeling as well. It's a great start to maybe dynamically reteam your teams. If you share the map with them, we've been in a situation where we also invited management here in these sessions, and they're like, oh, this doesn't seem so fruitful. Maybe, do you have ideas to change it? And now it becomes an interactive map where management and the teams can actually explain towards each other what some of the problems are. So that's team interaction modeling. Another thing what you can do is, as you can see here, I started modeling. I started saying this is the takeout app, and I have these software system. What we do after these sessions is look at the C4 diagrams they created and see, are these system boundaries correct? So I can actually distill diagrams out of these user needs map. And that's a different thing. The thing about this, because you might wonder why would we do that, a user needs map goes into the processes. So it might be that a software system comes back in many of these user needs map, and a C4 diagram is great to look from a system perspective. There it goes. From a system perspective, and then look at what are my relationships with the other things. So I can do diagramming as well. I also model from time to time on the user needs map Kafka topics on there. So I might, if that's important for the conversation, I might map it as an internal capability, saying, okay, there might be a team that needs information from this software system, so I might map here a Kafka topic that several other consumers are on, just to let them show, okay, who owns what. There's better tooling for that, I know, but they're not there yet. So look what they need from the map. If you want to put Kafka topics on there, if you want to put a database on there, one of the legacy systems is a database. We went into database tables just to look at the graph there. Yeah, so go deeper on the user needs map when you need it, and try to extract several other diagrams on it, several different visuals, and they should be aligned in a way. So that's the other thing. I already talked a little bit about threat modeling. That's really the thing we wanted to go into in business continuity management, looking at the threats. So as you can see here, there's out 0. It's an external capability. So we dissect between what are we building ourselves and what is something that we buy off the shelf or from others or from other services, and do we own it or do other people own it? That's what we also show on the map. And then I can check, is there an SLA in place? Right? If this is very important for your business, hopefully there's an SLA in place that also have some sort of software qualities, characteristics. Some people call it non-functionals. Hopefully there's something in there, that shows, is there actually a good service level agreement with this company? And we figured out that in some cases, in many companies, we figured out that there's not. They're actually using something down the value chain that's actually a high impact. There's this XKACD image that down the line there's this small block. Have you seen that? That could be the surface level agreement, right? That you think, right, okay, we just experimented on it, let's see if it works, and then nobody thought about actually checking if it can handle the load. I had it internally as well, that some team actually goes to one of the platform teams, started accessing their service, and then all of a sudden that team came in and says, hey, your service is not performing anymore. And then they were like, you're using our service? Okay, and it was overloading. So all these threats, are there any SLOs, SLEs, or SLAs in place between these teams, but also between the external teams? That's what the map can tell you as well. And then Barry was here today. You can actually, this is a graph as well. So you can actually perform residuality theory. As a threat modeling is usually on the system itself. But if you understand more of the context, you can actually start doing stressor modeling on this as well, which I effectively use as well, because in this session, I try to come up for more as a business, saying, okay, you're moving customer information to this external system. What if that becomes a problem and a competitor gets that data, and they can now see where you do your things, and then they can outcompete you in the market? Those are stressors. I can see these on the map as well, because I understand, A, the entire processes, again, simplified map, and based on these processes, I can see what the chain is. And not only me, if I do this with the teams and management get aware of that as well. And the last thing, and I didn't go into deep, but you can actually move this towards more of a Wardley map, maybe a higher level, to a C1 type of level, and you can start doing evolutions as well on a Wardley map. That's what we're actually doing. We actually went to all the teams, and then for management, we created a higher level overview on a Wardley map so that we can start having these conversations with them. They already started using the user needs map. I think they're a little low level for management, so we extracted that. But we also went to one of the platform teams, and they were controlling a specific service, specific database service, and we tried to Wardley map that out, looking at the evolution stage. And that actually worked as well. So you can, from that map, you can take deep dives as well. But it's a great starting point. So, tooling decisions, right? And here's a great book by Jackie, she's here, is the thing about the tooling decisions, so what you get in these discussions and you move to C4 diagramming is that some people say, oh, should we put this into an official tool? Should we start to do this in Structurizer, or should we start to do this? The thing about that is that you're isolating the tool away from the collaboration. For me, there's one important value here, and that's collaboration. Intentional collaboration. If we move it back to a tooling, right, a top-down decree, as I said, if architects are like, well, we have Archimate, so, but that's not the point. The point here is not to be exact in modeling. The point here is to be collaboratively in the modeling. Yeah? So then a question that popped up during what we are doing is, how do we actually keep these up to date? Who's ever had this question? It's not only for these toolings, but also all the diagrams you ever make. Yeah, and it's a very tough one. I don't have the best, I don't have the answer that will work in every company. I still have some answers that might help you do this for you. So do you know where I live? I live in a small village, and we're surrounded by highways, and they're closing these highways off recently a lot. So what does Google Map do? They send through our village, and then the whole village got blocked off. So what did they started to do? There's this nice thing here that says report a data problem, or there's actually collaboration in Google Maps, right? People driving actually is already collaboration. They're constantly adding data to the maps. But what they started doing in my village was actually closing down the roads in our village during that time. so that Google Maps didn't send them through that village, right? It's actually very interesting. So the thing about keeping these up to date is actually getting yourself into a continuous change on the maps. And that's what we call collaborative modeling. Who's heard of the term collaborative modeling before? There's a lot of collaborative modeling terms, tools like event storming, domain storytelling, and all these tools I just showed you are also a collaborative modeling tool. A collaborative modeling tool is a visualization technique to analyze complex and conflict-related decision-making process with all relevant stakeholders in decision-making to create that shared understanding. It doesn't come from the IT, by the way. It comes from, there are some studies in the Netherlands and Bangladesh about water resource management. You can understand in Bangladesh and in the Netherlands, there needs to be some water resource management. So together with stakeholders and experts, they create a collaborative modeling tool where they could model the water out, so how the water flows, and then decide on, okay, how are we actually managing it? I can tell you if there's a lot of inflow from Germany and the Netherlands, we need to do something. So there's this model going on there that they will flood entire landscapes in the Netherlands just to, well, make sure not houses will get flooded. So that's what they do with collaborative modeling tools, as I've been told, but we can do that in our businesses as well. And one important thing here in collaborative modeling is that you should have the right tool which would lower the friction. Friction is a scientific word for making sure people want to start doing it. That's why Archimate isn't working, because there's a high friction to learn what Archimate is. Yeah, it's like friction is like when you buy a subscription, it's very easy to buy a subscription, but it's very hard to get rid of it. That's using social science on friction to let people still be in that subscription. And an important thing about collaborative modeling compared to diagramming is that it should lower the friction. So a user needs map might not be exact, it might not be the best, it might not be the reality, but it's collaboratively modeling a landscape together where we all could agree on how it is. So there's a difference. I'm not saying diagramming is bad, you shouldn't use it, you should definitely use diagramming, but I think one of the most important thing is to do this collaboratively. And one thing I've been doing a lot recently is this great method by Andrea, which is called bite-size architecture sessions. Who's heard of them? Now, I've used them a couple of times. It's still a method, it's not proven, but what I see, if you every 4 weeks or 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, at least in a good cadence, you do 60 to 90 minutes architectural sessions. What she does is she's doing it with C4 modeling. She goes to the teams and let's do some C4 modeling first alone, and then we share them, and then we try to form a shared reality. If you do that every so often, it will keep itself up to date. Yeah, but it needs to be intentional. And that's what bite-size architecture is. And what we do with the user needs map is we go every other month, we go to the team, and we say what changed. So one important change that recently happened is saying, hey, we have this process where each activity in the process is not so important except this one process. One activity in that process is important. So they say, yeah, we want to move that out, and we're actually going to move it to the other system that is already very important, so that it's a better thing. So we put it on a map together. So every other month I go back, I say what changed, are your risks changed, and we go through this, and it will take 1.5 hours. Do it every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks maybe. It's not a lot of time to do it like 1.5 to 2 hours, and we don't do it we don't always do it with the entire team, but we at least do it with the product owner, preferably a manager of them, and some engineers in the team. I always let them decide themselves who will join us. Yeah? So they can use the map, and we collaboratively model that landscape together. And this is something I've seen work, and not all teams will then pick it up themselves, but for me it's a shared ownership, especially from me, to make it intentionally every so weeks. And we embedded it as architects to do this every 6 to 8 weeks. It's a great tool. So that's why if you look at the Agile Manifesto, it actually says individuals and interaction over process and tools. I think teams and interaction over process and tool. And what we did is, out of all these user needs map sessions, and this worked in this company so far, is we created for each team their team overview Miro board. So one place where we put the user needs map. As you can see here, this is the template, by the way. We add the roadmap there, and we add the C4 diagrams. And the rest, I put to the team what they want to put on there. Or they want to go to deeper Miro boards, it will be self-organized. But at least have that on a map, so that the teams at least have some form of coherence between teams. Yeah? The important part here is that I ask the teams in surveys, did this work for you? How would you want to keep it updated? That was the important part I did with the teams, right? I didn't force it on them, I experimented with them as an architect. So I didn't come in and say, this is what you're going to use. I'm saying, we have a problem, this is the problem, I think this tool will work, would you want to work with me to find out if it works? And some people were skeptical, some didn't. Some tools we tried to introduce on the team-owned Miro boards doesn't work. We're learning from it, we're adjusting from it, see what works and see what doesn't work. But most of the teams with the user needs map, at least we have a landscape. Some teams actually go deeper than the context. They go to container, maybe even deployment diagram, but that's up to the teams themselves. So we try to at least ask the teams to do this, so that then they help each other as well. And that's really my goal as an architect, is moving from enablement architect, so me within the teams trying to model with them, now I'm sucking up all that information, to making sure that I standardize a little bit of that, so that's more easily accessible for them, to look, where can I find that landscape information myself? Which team is actually impacted by this? Which team is owning what? And the user needs map, the landscape map, it's a very simple tool. Usually we do 2 sessions of 2.5 or 1.5 to 2 hours per team. If you're dealing with a legacy team, it will take a little bit more, because you always lack some people there. But usually the most teams are like 2 to 3 sessions and you get a map. It's not a lot of investment, not the whole team has to be there, by the way. And from there you can go from that enablement, creating user needs map, towards architecture as a platform, making sure that these maps stay alive. And that's really what I learned here, and what we learned that is working at the moment. Moving from facilitation to actually access a service with these user needs maps, create these maps for teams to actually understand their impact more and lowering their cognitive load. It's not perfect yet, we're still on this journey, but I see very more intentionally conversation happening. Sometimes they still need me a lot around the very legacy that's not owned, as you saw earlier, right? There's some unowned things, but most of the things that get owned, we see that they need us less and less and less, which is great. And that's my talk. Thank you very much.